Well, welcome everyone to another ACCTivate Presents webinar. My name is Jeff Edmonds and I'm the Consulting Partner Manager here at ACCTivate. Today's webinar, entitled Three Keys to Go Live, the three key steps to successful software implementation, is for any QuickBooks or software consultant. In this session, we're going to go over the three critical areas for taking a client through an implementation and to go live. So although I am with ACCTivate, today's webinar is not ACCTivate specific, rather a webinar for anyone in the software consulting business. So that said, ACCTivate is the maker of world-class inventory management software. So if you know of someone that's outgrowing QuickBooks for inventory and needs a solution, or if you would like to get involved as one of our consulting partners, just go to our website, activate.com, or shoot me an email, and that's jeff.edmonds, spelled E-D-M-O-N-D-S, at activate.com. And by the way, we will be monitoring the questions and chat, so feel free to post them on the GoToWebinar pane there on the control panel throughout the webinar. Today's presenter is, as you can see here on the screen, Jessie Rushing from JR Consulting. So hello, Jessie, and thanks for being here today. How are things going?
Very good. I'm excited to be here today.
That is awesome. We're excited to listen to what you have to say. Hey, before we get started, tell us a little bit about you and JR Consulting.
Absolutely. So for the last 3.5 years, I have been an independent consultant. I work pretty much with companies who are inventory-based companies exclusively, and I work with companies that are trying to implement or fix problems in their existing software. So I'm working with a lot of companies that are on QuickBooks Enterprise solutions. Usually they have a small warehouse, they have between 5 and 25 employees, and they're looking to either implement a new software system or improve the software system that they are already using.
Awesome, thanks. Hey, and by the way, we did a webinar about 6 weeks ago, and we talked about everything that goes from the beginning, so kind of the pre-implementation phase, up to the implementation phase. And so today you're going to start with kicking off the implementation. So we're excited that you're going to tell us about that. So I'm just going to let you take it from here. And then again, one more thing, we will have hopefully some time for some Q&A at the end. So again, post your questions. And when she's finished, we will hopefully have time for at least 2 or 3 questions. So Jessie, take it from here.
Okay, great. So today we're going to talk about 3 key steps to getting live on new software. And really I'm going to focus on the phase of software implementation that happens right after the client has made the buy decision. So they've figured out what software it is that they want to be using. And it's that in-between spot before they actually can turn that software on and start using it to run their business. So when we are thinking about software implementation, when you start to go through that process and understand, okay, what is it going to take to get this software up and running, usually that starts to become a pretty big project. And in general, software implementation is known as being hard and complicated. But as the consultant who is going to guide the client through this process, your job is to make it easy and keep it simple. And so that's what I'm going to go through today. I'm going to walk you guys through what my process is for how I keep it simple for the client and how I get them up and running on that system. Now, I basically break down the implementation into 3 key areas or key phases. And these are planning, data migration, and user training. All of those 3 things together lead up to going live. So what does it mean to actually go live on the software? Well, going live is when you actually flip the switch and you turn on the new system and you start processing your live business transactions in that new software. And before you can do that, these are the things that have to happen. You have to first start with your planning phase, which is where you're going to work out not only the project itself, but you're going to work on the workflows, you're going to handle any operations issues, and you're going to kind of design how the system is going to work as a whole. And then there's the data migration. How are we going to get data from the old system to the new system? And then there's the user training portion, which is how we're going to make sure that the client is actually really ready to go live on that new system. So I'm going to kind of go into each one of these 3 key phases and kind of break it down for you and just go through what kind of my process is. So the first one is the planning phase, and the planning phase, if I had like bigger than bold and red, I would use that for this phase because it's the longest and it's by far the most important phase. This is where you're going to start to organize how the new system is going to work. You're going to understand how the project is going to go. And all of these things really start at the very beginning. So I've kind of broken down the planning phase into a few different steps. The first one is going to be setting expectations, where we're going to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Then we're going to identify who's going to do what on the project and who the champions and the detractors are. And then we're going to go through a little bit about additional discovery and making sure that we understand the client's business. And then we're going to talk a little bit about workflow development and that system design where those operations pieces come in. So the first thing about setting expectations is we're really trying to make sure that everybody is on the same page. When a company has just made this huge software purchase, they're usually in a state of, wow, I've finally found the miracle solution that is going to solve every single problem that I have ever had, and it's going to fix everything, and it's going to be fantastic. Just get it up and running, turn it on, let's go already. Well, that, as you may know as a consultant, is really probably not the right attitude to have. It doesn't really matter how wonderful a software system is. There's no software out there in the world that is going to fix every problem that a company has. So when we start out the planning phase, I like to really make sure that we've set expectations. What can the software really do, and what can it not do? So this is going to be where you're going to go through the things that you learned in the discovery process leading up to which software was the right software for the client. And this is also going to be where you're going to go through what features and modules are being implemented, and make sure that you keep an eye out for anything that a software salesman might have promised that maybe isn't actually as easy or as realistic as the client expects it to be. And another thing to keep in mind at this phase when we're setting expectations and we're at the outset of the project is, what does the success of the project really look like? Whenever companies spend a lot of money on buying a big expensive piece of software that they're getting ready to implement, they're doing it because they're trying to solve some kind of pain or some kind of problem. So what is that? If the software is an inventory system, then maybe it's that their inventory is inaccurate, or maybe it's because they're trying to process more orders than their current system allows them to do, and they need to be able to process orders more quickly. So whatever it is, whatever that reason was that they originally decided to purchase the software, we really want to make sure that that's the goal that we have in mind for going live. If we get up and running on the new software and inventory is still inaccurate, they're going to see this whole project as having been a waste. So you want to make sure that you know, what does success really, really look like? Another thing that happens in the setting expectation part of planning is, what are the must-haves and what are the would-be cool ifs? You know, a lot of times when you're buying a piece of software that you're going to grow with, there may be things that that software can do that will make sense for the business down the road, but they're not necessarily critical to go live. They're not necessarily things that we need to and have to be using on day one. So those are the things that we want to identify, what we would call the must-haves. These are the things that are critical to go live. If the point of buying the new software was inventory needs to be accurate, then I'm pretty sure that inventory being in the system is going to be a must-have. But maybe barcoding in the warehouse is a would-be cool if. So it's something that would be great, but we don't have to have it on day one. We want to maybe get everything else up and running first and then add that in later. And then the last one is, are there processes and procedure issues that the greatest software in the world won't fix? When we're looking at a software system, the software can only do so much. That's what that little bubble there is. Software is not psychic, and if you don't tell it what you're doing, it won't know. So these are some of the expectations that I like to make sure that the client has really clearly in their mind. The other thing that I like to make sure at the outset of a project is that they understand what the project itself is going to look like and what it's going to take to get up and running. Usually there's a fair bit of work that they're going to have to do on their end in order to make this project be successful. So I like to give them details in writing. I like to give them lots of handouts, estimates, calendars, whatever you can do to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what it's going to take, so that you know that the support for the project and so that the employees are going to have the time that they need to be able to work on the project. All of that has to be made very clear to the highest levels of management at the client. It has to come from the top down. So those are some of the expectations. Another thing that you want to make sure that you're doing when you're going through the planning phase is to identify who's going to do what and who's going to be the people who actually make this happen. So there's going to be, usually at most clients, there's going to be the people who are really excited about the new software. They genuinely want the company to change and to improve. They're frustrated by their inefficient systems that they've been using for a long time. And then there are the people who are not quite as excited about change and who are going to sit there with their arms crossed, giving you a very dirty look that says, no, we can't possibly do that. We've always done it this way. This isn't going to work. So it's really important as the project manager to identify who are your champions, who are the people who are going to actually do the work, who are going to be the champions, who are going to be the voice of change in the business, and who are going to be those people that are going to have the, yes, but our customer, vendor, boss, owner, friend, cousin, uncle isn't going to like this at all, and that means it's not going to work and we can't do it. So once you've identified those people, there's a couple of things that you can do to work with them. So on the champion side, make sure that you have at least one point person that you work with directly that has the authority to assign tasks to the rest of the project team. So if somebody needs to assign that they're going to clean up the customer list, and somebody else needs to work on closing all the old open purchase orders, and somebody else, you want to make sure that you've got one point person who's on board with the project, who is a champion, who's going to have the authority to delegate those kinds of tasks. Another person, and they sometimes end up being the same person, sometimes you end up with a different person, you want to have one super user. This is your power user who's going to be the first line of support after go live. So it's going to be that one user who knows the software inside and out, is super excited that it's getting implemented, and is going to be able to answer questions for the rest of the users after go live. As far as those detractors go, one thing that I find helps a lot when working with those people who are going to cross their arms and give me dirty looks is that, I really, really make an effort to listen to them. There have been times when those detractors have brought up points that nobody else was willing to mention, and that those things need to be addressed. The thing is that you can't allow those detractors to derail the project. You want to listen to them, identify their issues, and address them, but not allow them to actually derail the project. I also make an effort to try to get those specific people some tiny specific wins. If I can take a shipping manager who is really upset about the fact that I'm changing his shipping software and show him just a little trick that now labels are going to print a tiny bit faster or something like that, usually that will be enough to win those detractors over. And another thing to kind of keep an eye out for as a consultant is that the positive attitude must come from the top down. If that detractor is an owner or a manager or a major stakeholder, then you're going to have a pretty big problem, because the support for the project, if it isn't coming from the top down, the project is going to be in trouble right away. So these are how you want to identify who you're going to be working with, who's going to be doing what, and how you're going to kind of all work together to get the implementation going. Now, as the consultant, another thing that you want to be aware of as you're going through this process in the planning phase is what we would call this additional discovery. So when you're going through this process, it's really important that you understand their business, that you understand how their business works, that you understand how they process orders, how they ship their products, how they get their customers. If you have a really clear understanding of their business, it'll be really easy for you to see how their business should be using the software system. So I like to do some additional discovery in the planning phase, and I do this through business process management questionnaires. So going through a list of questions: where do your customers come from? Who puts them in? How do you handle returns? And those kinds of things. And when you're going through this, you want to be really specific and really thorough. And you want to really get into, especially in the planning phase, because you probably did some of this at the initial outset of trying to decide which software was the right software. But you really want to get into, in the planning phase, all those special situations, those things that only come up every once and so often. So returns, back orders, warranty repairs, all of those kinds of unique things that might be special or unique to this particular business. Those are things that you want to just make sure that you have a clear understanding for them. The reason it's really important that you do this additional discovery part of the planning phase is because you're going to use it in this next phase, and that's the workflow development. So this is where you get into the actual nitty-gritty details of how is the software actually going to work. This is where all that other planning stuff, who's going to do what, who are your champions, who are your detractors, what are the expectations of what the system can do. This is where it all kind of comes together in the planning phase. So when you're going through this, there may be things that are going to change because the new system can eliminate steps in the process, or maybe there's things that are going to add new steps. So if you're implementing a software, for example, that has an approval step where now somebody has to check a box or sign off on and approve a transaction, whereas before there was a capability for that, that might be adding steps to the process. So as you go through this is the part where you really want to sit down, and I personally like to sometimes actually sit down in the new software and walk through what does their process look like? What is their new process going to be? How are they going to sit there and enter a new customer? How are they going to sit there and enter a new order? And that will give me an idea of how it's going to work for them. Sometimes management's going to need to make decisions about if it's the same employees are going to be doing the same tasks, or if responsibilities are going to get shifted, and how are they going to train new employees in the future. So they probably had some system for training their existing employees on their old system, but now you're going to need to think about when they hire that new sales rep 3 months from go live, how is that person going to get trained on the system? So the workflow development process is really very critical. And what I like to do with the workflow development process is to actually lay out for them, this is how you used to do it, this is how you're going to do it now. So if we're looking at, as an example, to use ACCTivate as an example, if we're looking at this is how you used to enter a customer into QuickBooks, this is how you're going to enter a customer into ACCTivate now. This is how you used to enter a credit memo into the system, this is how you're going to enter a credit memo now. And go transaction by transaction or process by process, and actually, some cases I write it out for them, in some cases we just walk through it together, but you want to make sure that they really understand it. And when you're planning these processes and procedures out, when you're working on the design of this, what you really want to do is make sure that you're keeping them in mind. There are some clients that I will trust a really complicated process or procedure to, because I know that their staff can handle it. I know that they have the attention to detail, they have the processes and the procedures, the manpower in place to be able to handle that. There are other times when I will say to a client, this is how you would normally do it, but I think that's too complicated for you guys. I think if you guys do it that way all the time, there's gonna be too many mistakes. I think we need to do it a different way so that it can be simpler. And I always try to go with simpler is pretty much almost always better. But you want to really just keep them in mind. Can they handle extra complications? Do they really, really need that level of detail? Sometimes you have to try to kind of back a client away from, well, we want to track every, all these 10 different pieces of information. Well, okay, that might be nice, but you're going to have to enter all 10 of those different pieces of information every single time you enter an order, and that's going to take a while, and it's going to be, maybe error prone or something like that. So do you really, really need all 10 of those pieces of information? Is that valuable to you? Is it worth the extra time and complication that it's going to take? So it's important to really, really design the system as a whole. As you're going through this, you want to make sure that you're testing this in the sandbox environment. Like I said, sometimes I'll sit down and go into the new software and work it out myself. It's important, though, that they do it too. So they will know things about how their orders process or how their customers are or something like that, that you want them to be the ones who are actually doing the testing in the sandbox environment. Don't just only test it yourself, because you might miss something that they're aware of. Another thing that you can do if you like to create flowcharts can be really handy here for mapping out, if the order used to go from this person to that person to this person for processing, and now it's going to go in a different order. It's going to go from here to approval to somebody else and then back again. Those are types of things that you could put together into a flowchart. And my personal favorite is step-by-step lists, because it's really easy. It's 1, enter the customer; 2, enter the order; 3, print the pick ticket. Whatever those different steps are. I like to do step-by-step lists. I also do this because I reuse them during training later. So what I'm building during the planning phase gets reused in a later phase of the implementation project. So those are the things that really make up the first key phase, which is I call the planning, workflow, operations, system design. We've set the expectations, so everybody is on the same page. We've identified the champions and the detractors, so everybody knows what their role is and who's going to do what. We've done additional discovery so that I feel comfortable as the consultant that I understand their business. And we've done the workflow development so I understand how they're going to use the new software. And I put an "and" at the end of this one, and I'm confident that it's going to work for them. This is something that's really important. If you are not comfortable or don't feel like they're going to be able to do it, like it's not going to work when you go to turn it on, then that's something that you need to listen to and you need to address with them. I would never take a client live that I didn't really feel was going to have a successful go live. If there's something that is not going to work for them, we need to fix that before we can move forward with the rest of the project. So anything like that is going to come up and be identified hopefully during the planning phase, and that's why we go through all of these different steps here in this first phase. So the next phase that we're going to go into is the data migration phase. So this is the really techie part. This is the part where you're going to take whatever old software system that they've been using and the new software system, and you're going to hopefully be able to get all of that old data out of the old system and into the new one. And a lot of time that's going to involve something like Excel or something like that to transfer that data. Another thing, though, that a lot of times I feel gets overlooked in software implementations is the setup and configuration of the new system. So it's really kind of two parts. It's one, it's the actual data itself moving from old to new, and it's also the configuration and setup of that new system. So when we're looking at the data migration part where we're getting the old information into the new system, we have a bunch of considerations, things like what will and what won't be transferred, how is it going to be transferred? Is it going to be exported to Excel, cleaned up? Is there a direct import tool? Like, for example, with ACCTivate, when I turn on ACCTivate, I connect it to QuickBooks and it pulls over certain information from QuickBooks automatically. So are there tools like that? And then there's really going to have to be, you're going to want to go through, and as you're planning your go live day, you're going to plan your data migration. So when are you going to transfer the data? Is some of it going to be transferred before go live? Is it all going to be transferred over your go live on go live day, or maybe the weekend right before, something like that? And is there going to be any time gap where you would have to deal with updates or changes? If I move customers a week before we go live, what do I do with all the new customers or changes to customers that might happen in that interim time? And then there's the question of who's going to do it. Is the customer doing the data transfer? Are you as the consultant doing the data transfer? Are you relying on an IT person or an outside, maybe the software company does some of the data transfer for you? And is there anything else that's going to need to be transferred? So when you're thinking about data migration, yes, we might be going from system A to system B, but maybe there's some information in spreadsheets, because nobody's ever had information in spreadsheets that was outside of QuickBooks or something like that, right? So maybe there's some information in spreadsheets, maybe there's another external database or something like that. Those things may need to be incorporated as well into the whole data migration plan. And are there any custom things or unique things that the client might need in terms of their data? So these are all things that you're going to want to put together into your data migration plan so that when you get ready for go live and you're actually doing the migration, you have a really good solid plan of what that's going to look like. These are just a couple of rules that I like to use. If you're not comfortable doing the data migration, don't do it. There have been times when clients have said, oh, well, we have this weird proprietary database that's got all this special information that's really critical. We need to get that out and have that go into the new system. And I'll be like, okay, that's great. I'm totally not comfortable pulling information out of that system, so I'm going to find another resource or somebody else who can handle that for us. If you're not comfortable with the data migration, with this more technical side, there are resources out there. Find somebody to help with it. Rule number 2, backup, backup, backup. Never, ever, ever do anything without a backup. We should all know that anyway, but I have to stress it again because especially when you're talking about manipulating and migrating and moving data around, it's really important. And then verify everything with the client. I have had situations where I will do a data import and I'll look at it and everything will look absolutely fine to me, and the client will look at it and they'll go, oh, this little whatever something is missing. Oh, okay, I didn't know there was supposed to be a little something whatever there. So, okay, let's make sure that, we get that brought over as well. So make sure that they confirm that all of the data looks good once it's been migrated over into the new system. Another thing with data migration is the configuration portion. So when we're talking about configuration, if we're talking about implementing, if you think about implementing QuickBooks for a new client, there's a lot of different options inside of QuickBooks that, if you go into that edit preferences screen, you can turn all kinds of things on and off. You can set all kinds of defaults. There's things like user permissions, and these are the things that a lot of time I feel like people wait until they're live on the software to then think about, oh, yeah, that's right, we do need to turn that feature on, or I do need to turn this pop-up message off, or I do need to give so-and-so permission to that now, which they didn't have before. So really make sure that you've got that accounted for before go live so that you're not figuring those things out on go live day. Another thing with configuration is that I like to test everything out in the sandbox and never guess about a feature or an option. Go into your sandbox and find out what happens if I check this box. Is that going to work the way that I'm expecting it to? Is that going to work the way that I want it to? So those are the things to keep in mind for data migration. You want to have a solid plan for data migration as you approach go live. You want to test everything out in your sandbox, have a backup plan, and have a rollback plan too in case something doesn't import right the first time. And keep in mind that data migration doesn't necessarily end at go live. There could be things that you end up adding to the data after go live if they're not critical to be in there at go live. And so that brings us to the final phase. And the final phase here is the user training phase. This is the final key point, key element that has to be in place to have a successful implementation and a successful go live. You've already gone through and made sure that the process is going to work for the client. Now it's time to make sure that the client actually understands it. So you want to make sure that you're doing your training sessions with the client ahead of time. And that could be on-site, it could be remote, it could be that you give them pre-recorded sessions to attend or to watch. You want to make sure that you know who's going to be attending all of the different sessions. And if there's anything that's like custom process for them. So, if the client has a very specific way that they handle returns, maybe you want to have a special training session just to cover their particular process for returns or something like that. That super user that you identified during the champions and detractors and back at the planning phase, you want to make sure that you've got one super user who attends all of the training sessions. This might mean that they're going to end up getting cross-trained in all kinds of things that don't actually pertain to their role within the company, and that's fine. You want that one person on site who knows the software inside and out and can answer questions after go live. Whenever you're doing training, it doesn't really matter what kind of training you're doing. These are just a couple of things that I like to keep in mind. It's more important what they hear than what you say. If I'm talking about software, which can be, software training can be particularly boring. And if I catch that as I'm going through the training session, people are falling asleep on me while I'm trying to, explain to them how to enter orders into the new software, it's important to stop and take a break and make sure that they are hearing what's being said, because if they're not hearing it, they're not getting it. Also, getting feedback from them constantly, making sure that they understand, do you feel comfortable with this? Are you going to be able to do this come go live day? Are you going to have questions when you actually sit down to do it? And I like to walk through real life examples, and I like to have them drive if at all possible. So take the new customer that just came across your desk this morning. Let's test putting it into the new system and see how that works, and see if everything goes in the way we expect it to. And then, asking them to explain things back and making sure that they really understood. Another thing that I like to do when it comes to the user training session is to create cheat sheets or some kind of handout that they can have after the fact. I've heard good things and bad things about creating procedure manuals. That's not personally something I think is particularly effective. But I do like to make sure that they have something that they can refer back to on that go live day after they've been out of the training session, so they've got just a quick reference. And the way I like to do these is I do no more than one activity or transaction per page. I do it as quick 1, 2, 3 bullet points, so there's no long text. And I use Snagit to make screenshots and do callouts. So there's a couple of examples there. You can see it's, locate the customer, click credit, click edit, check the box. So those are just a couple of examples of some cheat sheets that I like to use for user training. So when you're going through the user training, you want to make sure that you're using those workflows that you identified and designed during the planning phase to figure out what topics you need to be trained on, figure out who's going to attend what different training sessions, and engage with them and confirm that workflow that you set up and you designed, make sure that they're hearing it, that they're understanding it, and that they're comfortable with it, so that when they go to use the software on day one, they're going to be actually comfortable using it. So all of these things are going to lead up together to go live. Go live is the day that you flip the switch and start using the new software. A couple of things about go live day. I personally like to schedule go live day for the end of an accounting period, so the end of a month or a year if possible. Do it over a weekend if possible, and while this is my least favorite thing to say because I do this in real life, but over a 3-day or holiday weekend is actually even better, because then you have a little bit of extra time to make that work. So just, forget about enjoying those long holiday weekends, because you'll be planning all of your go lives for those. And then plan to be on site if possible. I always think clients feel more comfortable knowing that I am going to be there the day that they turn this on. Even if we are completely prepared, even if all of the planning, all of the data migration, all of the user training has been done, and we're all feeling very comfortable that the system is going to work, it's still very positive to be on site, so that if anything happens, if anything comes up, if any questions come up, you're there to be able to deal with them. And then you want to coordinate your go live with all of the different staff or teams that might be required. If there's IT staff that needs to be involved because of a server setup or something like that, you want to make sure you're coordinating with them, as well as any software vendors or support people. All of those kinds of outside parties need to be considered when you're planning your go live. So all three of these things together, the planning phase, the data migration, and the user training, hopefully lead up to a successful go live. And what should that look like? So everybody knows what to expect. Everybody knows who's going to do what. You know their business. You know how they're going to use the software. You have a plan for the data migration. You've tested and know how the new software is going to be configured and set up. The users who are going to actually be using the software are familiar with it. They know what their workflows are, and they have cheat sheets or quick reference guides if they need a hand or if they get confused. And then if all of that works out really well, you will end up as the consultant with ongoing support, because even after a successful go live, the client is still going to need help. They're going to have questions, they're going to have tech support and troubleshooting issues, they're going to want new customizations, and then down the road, all those things that were the would be nice to haves or would be cool ifs, they're going to want those things in the future. So maybe they want to add barcoding to their warehouse now that they're up and running on the new system, or they want to add integration with e-commerce now that they're on the new system. So all of those things are going to lead up to having ongoing support time with the client. So that pretty much concludes my presentation on the 3 keys to go live. My contact information is up here, so if anybody has additional questions, we're going to have, I think, a little time for Q&A now, but if anybody has any additional questions or anything, you can feel free to contact me.
Great, awesome. That was great information. So we actually do have a few questions. Well, I think we've got time to answer actually several of them, so let's get started. So generally, you talked about the point person and the super user. Mm-hmm. Who is generally the point person? Now I got a follow-up question to that too.
Okay, so the point person and the super user, in some cases, they're going to be the same person. It kind of depends on the client and the size of the client. They're not necessarily always the same person, though. The point person is the person that you're going to interact with. So usually that's going to be a manager, an owner. It's the decision maker. It's the person who has the authority to make decisions about anything from approving consulting time to saying, okay, we're going to do overtime this weekend because we're doing an inventory count. It's a decision maker. Whereas the super user is somebody who is really comfortable with the software. So sometimes that could be an IT person. It might be the accounting person. It might be somebody in, customer service. It might be the owner's son or somebody like that who just happens to be more technically inclined. The super user is the person who's going to know the software inside and out and be able to answer questions about it. So in some cases, they will end up being the same person, but not necessarily.
So my follow-up question was about the super user. So tell me like the personality style or the type of person that you really want as that super user. Like when you first, is it normally the first meeting you can spot that person, or does it take a while to find it?
I do tend to usually spot the super user in the first session. The super user is, and this is my own thing, so I hope I'm not going to offend anybody with this. I personally, I'm a computer geek. I've always been a computer geek. I like this stuff. The super user is usually going to be the same way. They're going to be the kind of techie, geeky person who's like really excited about the super awesome thing that they just figured out how to do in Excel, or really excited about the super awesome thing that they just figured out this software can do. So the people who get excited about those kinds of things, those are the people who are going to be your super users.
Great. Okay. So another question, what do you do if the client isn't ready to go live on the go live day that you've established?
So if you realize, and at some point you realize that you're not comfortable with them or going live, or they're not comfortable going live, you probably the best bet is going to be to delay your go live. I have never canceled a go live and not gone live on software, but I have pushed back go live dates when I didn't feel that the client was ready. So whatever it is, whatever that specific issue that is causing them to not be ready to go live, maybe the data migration isn't going to be ready by then, or the user training, somebody's going to be on vacation and we can't get them trained in time, or whatever the case may be, you want to just address whatever that issue is and then schedule accordingly and schedule a new date in the future.
Cool. All right. Okay, how do you time the phases? So are they sequential? Do they overlap? Are they concurrent? How does all that work?
So the three different phases, they really are kind of all happening at the same time. Your planning phase, it really kind of starts out, but you're planning your data migration in your planning phase, and you're planning your user training. So it's all kind of happening all at the same time. I wouldn't say that you have, it's not sequential where when phase one ends, phase two starts, and when phase two ends, phase three starts. It's not like that. It really is that things are, kind of happening all at the same time.
Okay, so how much time do you set aside for go live?
So that really depends on what system you're implementing. If you're implementing something that is relatively simple, if I'm doing a QuickBooks implementation, that's probably going to take, go live, the period that I consider to be go live is going to be probably, 1 day. If I'm implementing something like ACCTivate, go live, my on-site go live is probably going to be 2, maybe 3 days. If it's a bigger system, it might be a week or more. So it really depends on the system and on what you're implementing. How complicated is it? The more complicated, the longer it's going to be.
Great. Okay, let's see here. How long does the entire implementation process take? Do this in maybe give two answers. One is from start to finish, how many days is it? 15 days, 30, 60, 90 days? And then talk about the timing of how many billable hours, because we get that question all the time. What type of
okay.
I know it varies, but I'm just saying, give us maybe some examples.
It really varies on the project and on what software is being implemented. So in general, I think 6 weeks for what I specialize in is inventory add-on software. So in general, I think when we're talking about inventory add-on software, you're looking at about 6 weeks for the total implementation. It can be, I've seen companies that really they were well organized, they had their stuff together. I've seen them do it in 30 days. I've also seen companies that were not quite so together and it takes them a little bit longer. So I think the total time to implementation really depends on how organized and committed and ready to make the change the client is. As far as the amount of consulting time that's involved, again, it really depends on what's being implemented. I have had, it depends on the level of involvement as well from the consultant. So as a consultant, sometimes we want you to take us from point A to point B. We want you to be involved every step of the way, and we want a lot of hand-holding. That's obviously going to be a much higher number of consulting hours than we think we can handle this mostly on our own. We just want you to kind of spot check us as we go so that we make sure we don't make any giant mistakes. And that obviously is going to be a far fewer number of consulting hours in that engagement. So it really kind of depends on the engagement. I would say on the low end, you're probably looking at about 20 billable hours in terms of consulting time. If it's really just you guys are kind of doing it on your own and I'm just going to check in with you here and there and help you out a little bit. And it can go all the way up to the, I would say 80, 100, 120, 150 hours is not uncommon in a more typical, more involved, where I'm more involved directly type of engagement.
So I want to talk about that second one that you just brought up, because we talk about this all the time with our partners, which is, I think sometimes the client thinks that using a partner is, yes, all in, or no, not at all. And I think many times it's, can you just facilitate? Can you get us on the right track? So if we don't have thousands or tens of thousands of dollars to have somebody come in for months and months at a time, but we really could use a little bit of guidance. How do
Mhm.
you handle those type of clients? And let's say the implementation phase is 60 days. So by the time that they've installed it and you're on site on day one, let's say the go live date is 60 days down the road. Tell us how you're going to work with those clients that just want your, or 15 or 20 hours.
Well, with those clients, I mean, the process is still going to be the same. The difference is that I'm going to do a lot less of the actual work myself. So in terms of, the planning phase, setting expectations, going through the additional discovery, I'm going to say maybe give them more to-dos and more homework and say, okay, you need to go test this. You need to go run through this. You need to go work through this workflow. Make sure that you're comfortable with that. Now, in a more involved situation, I would be guiding them through that process, which would end up in that additional time. So, I still take the client through the same basic steps of what it's going to take to get, there's going to be probably a kickoff meeting. There's going to be, a list, a checklist of what they need to do. But the difference is that in a situation where I'm kind of taking more of just a guidance role and not being as directly involved, it's more like homework for them. Whereas in the other situation, I'm actually guiding them through it, hand-holding, walking them through that process.
And how many times does the lower end engagement, where they say just kind of guide us, does that turn into a lot more hours? The 20-hour gig turns into a 40, 60, 100 hour.
It always turns into more, and usually they're happy about that. So, it does usually turn into more, and there will be points at times where, I will say, okay, I know that you originally at the outset didn't want me to be as involved in this. Would you like for me to walk you through this next phase? That will be this many more hours. And usually the answer is going to be yes, we'd rather go ahead and make that investment and have those extra hours and get walked through this particular part that we're struggling with. Once they get into it and they get into the actual details of it, there will be things that will usually come up that then they'll go, okay, we want this. And as long as you're clear with the client to let them know, okay, that's a little more than what you wanted from the original estimate. As long as you understand that and you're comfortable with that, then okay, I'll be available to do that. So.
Awesome. And what a great marketing strategy that is just get in the door, and when they see what value you bring to it, a lot of times that allows them to do that too.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, another question. So do you ever do implementations where you're never on site? And if so, what special considerations do you make?
I always try to be on site for go live. So I do implementations remotely where everything except go live is remote, but I will usually travel for go live just so that I can be on site for that. Pretty much everything else though leading up to go live, so all of the training, all of the expectations, all of the working with the clients, all the discovery, all of that can really be done remotely, and then go live is on site.
Okay, awesome. Okay, we've got one more in the queue, and if we don't have any more after this, then we will just end for the day. The last question we've got so far is, on the consultant side, when's the project too big for a single person?
It depends on the project and the consultant, or on the project and on the consultant, I think. You're never doing this completely alone. So, even if I'm the only consultant, the client is doing a lot of the work. So in a larger project with a larger client, you're going to have more resources involved from the client side. To give you an example, an ACCTivate implementation where there's 5 employees at the company, it's going to be myself as the consultant working with 1 or 2 of those employees at the company. In an ACCTivate implementation where there's 50 employees at the company, it's going to be myself as the consultant, and we're going to be working with 10 or 20 of the employees at that company. And each one of them, we're working with, then it gets broken down into like department managers and supervisors and then different key staff members. So, I think the size of the project depends. I personally don't do projects where I bring in other consultants, but I definitely do projects where I rely a lot more heavily on the client's resources.
That's great. Okay. Well, Jessie, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate all you had to tell us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, let me say one other thing before we close, though. We're going to have another installment of ACCTivate Presents. However, the date hasn't been firmed up. It's going to probably be early next year. So we'll try to do these every 2 months or somewhere around there. So just be sure to watch out for the announcement coming to your email address. It'll be normally about a few weeks prior. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us, and we will see you next time.